Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, April 17, 1943. Detective Horace Wendell Grimshaw sat in his office at the 19th Precinct and reread the transcript of the third interrogation. The April rain drummed against the window, casting shifting shadows across the typed pages. Outside, the city continued its wartime routine, trolleys clanging along Market Street, women in headscarves hurrying to their shifts at the Navy Yard, newsboys hawking papers with headlines about the Allied advance in North Africa. But in this office, in this moment, Grimshaw's entire focus was on the document before him. War veteran, holder of 2 Distinguished Service Crosses from the Great War, exemplary citizen Eldridge Ashworth, the neighbor from across the hall from the missing girl, had just left the office. 41 years old, spotless record, member of the American Legion since 1919, shrapnel wound in his leg from the Argonne Forest. A man the entire building on Walnut Street respected. A man who volunteered as an air raid warden, who organized scrap metal drives for the war effort, who kept the building's Victory Garden immaculate. A man who had organized the search for 8-year-old Cordelia Pemberton when she failed to return home on the evening of April 10th. A man who knew details about the child's final hours that only her killer could have known. Grimshaw lit a lucky strike. His hand trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from understanding what would happen next. He had been a detective for 23 years, had seen every kind of crime Philadelphia had to offer. Murders of passion, murders for profit, murders from desperation. But this was different. This was something colder, more calculated, more disturbing in its absolute certainty. He could see through this entire case, could see how it would end. But police work demanded evidence, not intuition, and he had the evidence. Finally, after 7 days of careful investigation, he had the evidence. It had started as a routine missing child case, or at least that's what Grimshaw had thought when he first received the call. April 10th, Tuesday, 4:20 in the afternoon. A beautiful spring day in Philadelphia, the kind of day when mothers opened windows to let in fresh air, when children begged to play outside, when the war seemed far away despite the ration books and the gold stars appearing in too many windows. Cordelia Pemberton, second-grade student at Franklin Elementary School, left apartment 12 on the 3rd floor of 217 Walnut Street. A well-maintained building in a respectable neighborhood, not wealthy but solid working class. The kind of place where people knew their neighbors, where women gathered to can vegetables together, where men discussed the war news over evening cigarettes on the front stoop. Cordelia told her mother, Vivian Irene Pemberton, age 34, that she was going to the courtyard to play on the swings. Just a normal request from a normal child on a normal Tuesday afternoon. Mother gave permission. Why wouldn't she? The courtyard was safe, enclosed, visible from multiple apartment windows. Other children played there every day. The girl left, her brown shoes with straps clicking down the wooden stairs, her blue dress with white checks bright in the afternoon sun streaming through the stairwell window. No one saw her alive again. At 7 o'clock, when the sun had set and the evening darkness had settled over the city, Vivian came down to the courtyard looking for her daughter. The street lamps had come on, casting their yellow glow across the empty playground. The swings hung motionless in the still air. No children. No Cordelia. Vivian's heart had started pounding then, though she told herself not to panic. Cordelia had probably gone to a friend's apartment, lost track of time. Children did that. It was innocent. Normal. She didn't find her daughter. Went door to door in the building, knocking, asking. Quote, 0 heads shook. Doors closed. No one had seen the girl. She asked the neighborhood children who were being called in for dinner. Nobody had seen Cordelia after 5 o'clock. One boy, Eugene Hartley, remembered seeing her on the swings around 4:30. After that, nothing. By 7:30, Vivian's hands were shaking as she knocked on the superintendent's door. Mr. Kowalski, a Polish immigrant who managed the building, immediately understood the situation. He'd lived through enough to know when something was wrong. He made the call to the police. At 8:15, a patrol car arrived. Two beat cops, young men who looked barely old enough to shave, took down the basic information. Missing child, 8 years old, last seen at 4:30. They radioed it in, promised to search the neighborhood, told Vivian not to worry. Children always turned up. But at 9 o'clock, Detective Horace Wendell Grimshaw arrived on scene, and Vivian knew this was serious. Detectives didn't come for children who had simply wandered off. Detectives came when the police thought something bad had happened. The first person to approach the detective in the courtyard was Eldridge Ashworth, resident of apartment 11, direct neighbor to the Pemberton family. Grimshaw's first impression: this was a man who had himself together. Tall, about 6 feet, and lean, with the kind of leanness that came from discipline rather than poverty. Military bearing so pronounced you could spot it from across the street. Back straight, shoulders squared, every movement economical, purposeful. He wore a crisp white shirt despite the evening hour, tie still perfectly knotted, trousers pressed with a sharp crease. His dark hair was combed back with pomade, not a strand out of place. His shoes, even in the dim courtyard light, gleamed with fresh polish. When he spoke, his voice was measured, crisp, each word clearly enunciated. "Detective Grimshaw? Eldridge Ashworth. I live in apartment 11, directly across from the Pembertons. I've been coordinating the initial search efforts." Not helping with the search, coordinating, as if he were running a military operation. And he had been, in a sense. He had already questioned all the building's residents, compiled a written list of those who had seen the girl during the day, names, apartment numbers, exact times when possible. He had organized a group of male volunteers from the building to comb through the surrounding courtyards and basements, assigning specific areas to specific men to avoid duplication of effort. He had sent women to check with shopkeepers along Walnut Street, asking if anyone had seen a girl in a blue dress. He had established a command post in the building lobby where information could be centralized. He worked methodically, like a commander issuing orders. Grimshaw mentally noted, this kind of man was a godsend for an investigation, an organized witness who had already done half the work, the kind of citizen every detective hoped to find at a crime scene. They walked through the building together, Ashworth leading the way with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of the property. They examined the basement first, a dark, dank space that smelled of coal and mildew. Ashworth produced a flashlight from his pocket without being asked, swept the beam methodically across the corners, behind the furnace, into the coal bin. "Quote 3, he said. Quote 4. They climbed to the attic, a hot, dusty space filled with trunks and abandoned furniture. Ashworth navigated it with ease, pointing out the areas he'd already searched. "That corner is accessible. I checked behind every trunk. The far end, near the chimney, has a gap in the floorboards, but it's too small for a child. I measured it." Of course he had measured it. They came back down to the courtyard. Ashworth showed exactly where the girl liked to play, what route she usually took from the front door to the swings. He spoke precisely, without emotional inflection, as if he were briefing an officer on terrain features. "She usually came out this door." He pointed to the building's rear entrance. "Quote 7, quote 8. Grimshaw asked. "Quote 9, Ashworth said simply. Ashworth replied. Grimshaw made a note. Most people wouldn't notice a child's playground patterns with that level of detail. But maybe Ashworth was just thorough. Some veterans were like that. Hyper-vigilant, always watching, unable to turn off the wartime mindset even 25 years later. Ashworth continued. Grimshaw looked at the archway. It was a brick passage that connected the courtyard to the street, providing access for residents. Dark. Enclosed. A good place for someone to wait unseen. Quote 18, quote, he asked Ashworth. Quote 19, quote. Quote 20, quote. Quote 21, quote. Quote 22, quote, Grimshaw said. He made another note. Grimshaw made notes. Witness number 1, Eugene Hartley, 8 years old. Child testimony. Unreliable, but it was all they had for now. They went up to the Pemberton apartment on the 3rd floor. The door was open. Neighbors were coming and going, women bringing food that no one would eat, men standing awkwardly in corners, unsure how to help. The smell of coffee filled the small space, along with cigarette smoke and the peculiar silence that comes when tragedy enters a home. The girl's mother sat at the kitchen table, staring at a fixed point on the wall. She wore a faded house dress and slippers. Her hands rested on the table, palms down, absolutely still. Her face was blank, not crying, not speaking, just absent. Shock, Grimshaw recognized. He'd seen it in war widows, in parents who'd lost children to disease, in people whose minds simply couldn't process what had happened to them. Beside her sat Mrs. Henderson from apartment 15, holding Vivian's hand, murmuring reassurances that meant nothing. "She'll turn up, dear. Children wander. She's probably at a friend's house, lost track of time. You'll see." But Vivian's eyes suggested she knew better. The father, Walter Thaddeus Pemberton, 42 years old, machinist at the Baldwin Locomotive Works, paced the small living room like a caged animal. Back and forth. 4 steps to the window. Turn. 4 steps to the hallway. Turn. Repeat. He wore his work clothes still, oil-stained trousers, a chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms ropey with muscle. His hands clenched and unclenched rhythmically as he walked. His face was gray. Grimshaw said gently. Walter stopped pacing. Turned. His eyes were red-rimmed, wild. Quote 26, quote 27, Grimshaw said. Quote 28. Quote Walter's shoulders sagged. He nodded, sat down heavily in an armchair. What do you need to know? Ashworth stood by the door like a sentry, silent, watchful. Didn't interfere, but didn't leave either. Grimshaw noticed his presence, but didn't object. Sometimes witnesses felt more comfortable with a familiar face in the room. Grimshaw asked the standard questions, his voice gentle, professional. Had there been any conflicts in the family? Any arguments? Any reason Cordelia might have run away? Walter's voice cracked. She's 8 years old. She doesn't run away. She's a good girl, obedient, never causes trouble. Has she ever stayed out late before? Gone to a friend's without telling you? Never, Vivian said quietly. It was the first time she'd spoken. Her voice was barely audible. Walter said. He gestured helplessly. Grimshaw asked Walter. Same trolley line Ashworth used, Grimshaw noted. Different shifts, though. Walter worked day shift. Ashworth worked swing shift. Vivian nodded. Mrs. Henderson said firmly. Grimshaw asked. Vivian shook her head. Grimshaw turned to Ashworth, who still stood by the door. Ashworth replied. Always organizing. Always taking charge. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 50. Underscore, 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 quote, underscore 52, underscore, 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 quote, underscore 53, underscore, 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 quote, underscore 54, underscore, underscore. The precision was remarkable. Grimshaw wondered if Ashworth could recite similar details about every resident. Quote 55, quote 56. There was the faintest hint of disapproval in that last phrase. Something in the tone made Grimshaw look up from his notepad. Ashworth stood motionless, hands clasped behind his back, gaze directed straight ahead, face like stone. But in that last phrase, quote 57, there had been an almost imperceptible note of satisfaction? Pride? As if Cordelia's good behavior somehow reflected well on Ashworth himself. Or had Grimshaw imagined it? He made a mental note. Probably nothing. The man was just particular. Veterans often were. They'd lived in a world of strict rules and military discipline, and they brought that mindset home with them. They finished the interview. Grimshaw instructed the beat cop to organize patrols, notify all police stations, check hospitals and morgues. Standard procedure. Ashworth volunteered to accompany the patrols. Quote, 58, quote, he said. Quote, 59, quote. Grimshaw allowed it. Why refuse help? The search continued all night. Ashworth walked with patrols until 5 in the morning, methodically checking every nook, every archway, every trash heap. Spoke little, worked with concentration. By morning, there were no results. April 11th, Wednesday. Grimshaw arrived at Walnut Street at 8 in the morning. Ashworth was already standing in the courtyard talking to the janitor. Looked fresh despite not having slept all night. Military conditioning. Quote, 60. Quote, he called out. Quote, 61. Quote, 62. Quote, 63. Quote. They went up to Mrs. Carmichael's apartment, a woman about 55, heavy-set, with a tired face. She confirmed it. Yes, she'd seen a man. Medium height, in a dark overcoat, fedora. Didn't see his face. It was getting dark. He stood in the archway, smoking, watching the playground. Seemed suspicious, but she didn't stop. Kept walking. Grimshaw asked. Mrs. Carmichael shrugged. Grimshaw wrote it down. Witness number 2. Vague description, dusk, poor visibility. Almost useless. Ashworth stood nearby, listening attentively, then said, quote, 67 __. Mrs. Carmichael concentrated, trying to remember. Ashworth asked questions. How tall was the man compared to the lamppost? What color was the overcoat? Black, gray, brown? Fedora or cap? The woman was confused, but Ashworth patiently guided her thoughts. Gradually, the image became clearer. Height, about 5'10", maybe a bit taller. Overcoat dark gray, long. Fedora with a brim, old-fashioned. Shoes, didn't see. And his hands? Ashworth asked. Was he wearing gloves? Mrs. Carmichael thought. I don't think so. Bare hands. Yes, definitely. I saw him holding a cigarette. No gloves. What brand? Lucky Strike? Chesterfield? I don't know. Just a regular cigarette. Grimshaw observed this dialogue and felt slight unease. Ashworth was asking the right questions. Too right. As if he knew exactly what needed to be determined. But this could simply be a result of military experience. Intelligence officers knew how to work with details. They went back down to the courtyard. Ashworth suggested canvassing the neighboring buildings, questioning janitors and doormen. Maybe someone had seen the suspicious man elsewhere. Grimshaw agreed. They split up. The detective went to Chestnut Street, Ashworth along Walnut. 2 hours later, they met again. No new witnesses. Nobody else had seen a man in a dark overcoat. April 12th, Thursday. 2 days had passed. Still no Cordelia. The girl's mother was in the hospital. Nervous breakdown. The father continued working but looked like a ghost. Ashworth never left the investigation. Every morning he came to the station, offered help, shared observations. Grimshaw began getting used to his presence. Reliable man, disciplined, useful. At noon came a report from South Philadelphia. Child's body discovered. Girl, 8 to 10 years old, in an abandoned shed on the outskirts. Grimshaw and Ashworth left immediately. The shed stood on vacant lot between 2 buildings, half collapsed, boarded up. Inside, a body. Cordelia Pemberton, lying on old burlap sacks, covered with a tarp. Dressed, shoes on. No visible signs of violence. Face peaceful, as if sleeping. Ashworth froze in the shed doorway, stared at the body without moving. Face still stony, but Grimshaw noticed. His Adam's apple jerked. Once. Quickly. The man swallowed. Quote, 73, quote, the detective asked. Quote, 74, quote, Ashworth said hoarsely. Quote, 75. quote, 76, quote, 77. Grimshaw wrote this down, then asked, quote, 78, quote. Ashworth didn't answer immediately, then said, I saw her. At 8 o'clock when I was leaving for work. She was coming out of the building with her mother. Her mother was taking her to school. I noticed because the girl stumbled on the steps, almost fell. I called out, was everything all right? The mother nodded, thanked me. That's how I remembered. The explanation was reasonable, natural, but something about it was wrong. Grimshaw couldn't figure out what exactly. The medical examiner established, death occurred on the evening of April 10th, between 5:30 and 6:30. Cause, asphyxiation. No signs of struggle. The child died quickly, without resistance. No other injuries found. Strange picture, as if the girl didn't resist, trusted the killer. Grimshaw returned to the station, sat in his office, smoked, thought. Something didn't fit. The entire picture was wrong. Missing girl, model neighbor organizing searches, body found in a shed. No witnesses, no evidence, clean as a whistle. Too clean. He pulled out his notepad, began reviewing the details. April 10th, Tuesday, 4:20, girl leaves apartment. 4:30, seen on swings. 5 o'clock, unfamiliar man in dark overcoat near building. 5:30 to 6:30, time of death. Window, 90 minutes, from 4:30 to 6. Who had access to the girl during this time? Unfamiliar man in overcoat, but he was a phantom. Nobody else saw him. Only Mrs. Carmichael. And she didn't get a good look. Who else? Grimshaw opened the list of witnesses, ran his finger down, stopped at one name. Eldridge Ashworth. War veteran, model citizen, organizer of the search, first on the scene, knew every detail, answered every question, helped with the investigation. Too helpful. Grimshaw stubbed out his cigarette, lit another. Thought about the questions Ashworth had asked Mrs. Carmichael, about the gloves, about the cigarette brand, about the height relative to the lamppost. Questions an investigator would ask, or questions a killer would ask to create a false trail. He thought about how Ashworth had __quote_80__, the detail about the unfamiliar man only the next morning, after a whole night to think, to plan, to construct a version. He thought about how Ashworth had immediately recognized the dress, the exact dress, with checks, and the shoes with a strap. Details, precise details, too precise for a casual glance on the stairs. Grimshaw called the Pemberton apartment. Vivian answered. He asked, quote 81, quote 82, quote 83. Silence. Then, quote 84, quote 85, quote 86. Grimshaw thanked her, hung up. So, first lie. Ashworth claimed he noticed the dress because the girl stumbled, but she hadn't stumbled, meaning he noticed the dress for another reason, meaning he was paying very close attention to the child, meaning... Grimshaw pulled out a city map, found Walnut Street, found the Baldwin Locomotive Works where Ashworth worked, traced the route. Ashworth left for work at 8. The factory was in Eddystone, 12 miles away. He commuted by trolley. The trip took about 45 minutes each way. Grimshaw called the factory, asked to speak with the personnel department, asked what time Eldridge Ashworth arrived for work on April 10th. Answer, 9:30. 30 minutes late. Apologized, said the trolley was delayed. Grimshaw calculated, if Ashworth left home at 8 and the trolley took 45 minutes, he should have arrived at the factory at 8:45. Not 9:30. Where were those 45 minutes? He called the trolley company, Asked if there had been delays on the Walnut Street line on April 10th. Answer: no delays. Regular schedule. Grimshaw stubbed out his second cigarette. Second lie. He thought about the timeline again. Cordelia seen on swings at 4:30. Ashworth finished work at the factory at 4:15. Trolley back took 45 minutes. He should have arrived home around 5. Same time as the girl's death. Same time as the unfamiliar man in the overcoat. Grimshaw opened his desk drawer, pulled out the file photo of Ashworth from his veterans housing application, studied it. Medium height, lean build, dark hair. Could fit the description of the man in the overcoat. He pulled out the telephone directory, found Ashworth's name. Address: 217 Walnut Street, apartment 11. Employer: Baldwin Locomotive Works. Previous address: 412 Somerset Street, Kensington. Grimshaw called the Kensington precinct, asked if they had any records on Eldridge Beaumont Ashworth. They did. In 1934, Ashworth had been questioned in connection with the disappearance of a neighbor's cat. The cat had belonged to a young girl. The girl claimed Ashworth had threatened to deal with the cat because it made too much noise. Ashworth denied it. The cat was never found. No charges filed. In 1935, Ashworth had filed a complaint against a family in his building for allowing their children to play unsupervised in the hallway. The complaint was dismissed as frivolous. In 1936, Ashworth moved out of Kensington. Grimshaw closed the file, sat back, thought. Pattern. A man who couldn't tolerate disorder, who complained about noise, about children, about mess. A man who wanted everything to be proper, clean, correct. A man like that could look at a beautiful, innocent 8-year-old girl and think, she's perfect now, before life ruins her, before she grows up and becomes corrupted, before she turns into something less than ideal. A man like that might decide to preserve that perfection, permanently. Grimshaw stood up, put on his hat, walked to the evidence room, asked for Cordelia Pemberton's clothing, examined the blue dress with white checks, looked at the fabric, at the seams, at the collar. Found it. A single brown fiber, caught in the collar. Wool, not from the girl's clothing, not from her parents' apartment. He bagged it, took it to the lab, asked them to analyze it. Then he went back to his office, called Ashworth, asked him to come in for another interview. Quote 89, quote, he said. Quote 90, quote. Ashworth arrived 30 minutes later. Crisp suit, perfectly knotted tie, shoes shined to a mirror finish. Grimshaw noted, even in April, the man wore a wool overcoat, dark gray, long. Quote 91, quote, Grimshaw said. Quote 92, quote. Ashworth sat, straight-backed, hands folded in his lap. Grimshaw began. Ashworth said. Ashworth didn't blink. Mrs. Pemberton was distracted, looking in her purse for keys. The girl did stumble, briefly. She caught herself. Mrs. Pemberton didn't notice. I see, Grimshaw said. And you arrived at work at 9:30. Yes, the trolley was delayed. The trolley company says there were no delays that day. They're mistaken, Ashworth said calmly. I waited at the stop for 15 minutes. Perhaps they don't keep accurate records. Perhaps, Grimshaw said. And that afternoon, what time did you finish work on April 10th? 4:15, my usual time. And you arrived home when? Around 5:15. Trolley was crowded. Took longer than usual. Did you see Cordelia in the courtyard? No, I went straight upstairs. Did you see anyone in the courtyard? No one I recall. No man in a dark overcoat? No. Grimshaw leaned back. Strange. Mrs. Carmichael saw him at 5 o'clock. right around when you would have been arriving home. And you didn't see him? The courtyard has several entrances, Ashworth said. We must have used different ones. Must have, Grimshaw agreed. He pulled out a manila folder, opened it. Mr. Ashworth, do you own a dark gray wool overcoat? I do. Several men do. It's a common garment. The one you're wearing today? Yes. May I see it? Ashworth hesitated, just for a moment, then stood, removed the overcoat, handed it over. Grimshaw examined it, turned it inside out, looked at the lining, at the seams, at the pockets. Found it. A small tear in the right pocket. Fresh. The threads were still loose. How did this happen? He asked. I caught it on a nail, Ashworth said. Last week, in the basement of our building. I was checking the furnace. Last week? Yes. Grimshaw pulled out a small evidence bag, the brown wool fiber. This was found on Cordelia Pemberton's dress, caught in her collar. The lab says it's wool, dark gray, same type as your overcoat. Ashworth looked at the fiber. His face remained impassive. Many men have gray wool overcoats, Detective. That proves nothing. No, Grimshaw agreed. But combined with the lies about the trolley delay, the lies about the girl stumbling, the 45 minutes you can't account for on the morning of April 10th, your presence in the neighborhood at the exact time of the girl's death, and your unusually detailed knowledge of her clothing, it's starting to form a picture. What picture? Ashworth asked quietly. A picture of a man who was very interested in Cordelia Pemberton, who watched her, who noticed what she wore, who knew her schedule, who knew when she'd be alone in the courtyard. Ashworth sat very still. That's speculation. Is it? Grimshaw pulled out another document. I spoke with your former neighbors in Kensington. They remember you. They remember complaints about children, about noise, about mess. They remember a man who couldn't tolerate disorder. I value order, Ashworth said. That's not a crime. No, but killing a child is. Silence. Ashworth looked at Grimshaw. His face was stone, but in his eyes, something flickered. Not fear, not guilt, something else. Recognition, perhaps. The acknowledgement that the game was over. You don't understand, Ashworth said finally. Then explain it to me. Ashworth took a breath. Cordelia was perfect. Do you understand? Perfect. Innocent. Clean. Unspoiled. I watched her for months. Saw how she behaved. How she spoke. How she moved through the world with grace. She was everything a child should be. And you killed her. I preserved her, Ashworth corrected. The world is corrupt, Detective. It ruins everything beautiful, turns children into crude, vulgar adults. I saw it in the war. Boys who went to France with pure hearts came back broken, coarsened by what they'd witnessed. Cordelia would have grown up, become like the others, loud, coarse, spoiled. I couldn't let that happen. So you murdered her. I saved her, Ashworth insisted. His voice was steady, almost serene. She'll never know disappointment, never know degradation. She'll remain forever as she was. Perfect. Grimshaw felt sick. You strangled an 8-year-old girl because you thought she was too good for this world? I preserved her innocence, Ashworth said. She trusted me, came with me willingly when I told her I'd found an injured bird in the shed. She didn't suffer. It was quick, peaceful. She fell asleep in my arms, thinking she was helping save a small creature. Isn't that better than a lifetime of corruption? You're insane. No, Ashworth said calmly. I'm the only one who sees clearly. The only one who understands that sometimes preservation requires sacrifice. I enlisted at 15 to fight in the Great War, lied about my age because I believed in preserving our way of life. I've spent my entire life maintaining order, protecting what's good and pure. This was no different. This was murder. This was salvation. Grimshaw stood up. Eldridge Ashworth, you're under arrest for the murder of Cordelia Ruth Pemberton. Ashworth stood as well, extended his wrists for the handcuffs. I understand. I broke the law. The law must be upheld. That's proper. That's order. You're a monster. No, Ashworth said quietly. I'm a custodian of innocence. History will understand, even if you don't. They led him away. Grimshaw sat in his office for a long time after that, smoking, thinking, trying to understand how a man could murder a child and call it kindness. He couldn't. The trial took place in July 1943. Philadelphia in summer was sweltering. The courtroom had no air conditioning, just ceiling fans that barely stirred the humid air. Men loosened their ties. Women fanned themselves with folded newspapers. The windows stood open, letting in street noise. Trolley bells, automobile horns, newsboys shouting headlines about Sicily. But inside Courtroom 3 of the Philadelphia County Courthouse, attention focused entirely on the defendant. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, standing room only. People lined the walls, crowded into the aisles. The case had made front-page headlines for weeks. War hero accused of murdering neighbor child. Veteran says he preserved girl's innocence. Decorated soldier faces death penalty. The prosecution table was manned by District Attorney Gerald Fitzpatrick, a florid Irishman in his 50s with a reputation for righteous fury in the courtroom. He'd been elected on a law and order platform and took child cases personally. Had 3 daughters of his own. The defense table held Marcus Levy, a thoughtful Jewish attorney known for taking difficult cases. He'd agreed to defend Ashworth pro bono, believing that even monsters deserved proper representation. That was the American way. And at the defendant's table sat Eldridge Ashworth, looking exactly as he had every day of the trial. Impeccable. Dark suit pressed to perfection, white shirt crisp, tie knotted precisely, hair combed back with pomade, posture military straight, face expressionless. He took notes during the proceedings, neat, organized notes in small, precise handwriting, as if he were documenting someone else's trial. The prosecution built their case methodically over 2 weeks. First came the physical evidence. The wool fiber found on Cordelia's dress matched to Ashworth's overcoat. The fiber expert testified for 3 hours, explaining the microscopic analysis, the distinctive dye composition, the probability that it came from Ashworth's garment. Quote, _168 he said. Then came the timeline evidence. The trolley company representative testified that there had been no delays on April 10th. The factory personnel manager testified that Ashworth had arrived at work 30 minutes late that morning, claiming trolley problems that never occurred. The medical examiner testified about the time of death, between 5:30 and 6:30, exactly when Ashworth should have been arriving home from work. Mrs. Mildred Carmichael testified about the man in the dark overcoat she'd seen near the building at 5 o'clock. Fitzpatrick asked. She admitted. She hesitated. Levy said, but the jury had heard it. The seed was planted. Young Eugene Hartley testified, fidgeting in his chair, overwhelmed by the adult proceedings. His mother sat in the front row, watching anxiously. Fitzpatrick asked gently. The boy hesitated, as if she knew the person, as if she trusted them. Vivian Pemberton testified, her voice barely audible. She'd lost weight since April, the healthy roundness gone, leaving her gaunt and hollow-eyed. Walter sat in the front row, gripping the railing. Mrs. Pemberton, did Mr. Ashworth see your daughter on the morning of April 10th? Yes, we encountered him in the hallway when I was walking Cordelia to school. Did your daughter stumble on the stairs that morning? No, she walked normally. She was holding my hand. So, when Mr. Ashworth claimed he noticed your daughter's dress because she stumbled, that was untrue? Objection! Levy stood, argumentative. Sustained. Let me rephrase. Did your daughter stumble? No, she didn't. Thank you, Mrs. Pemberton. The coup de grace came from Grimshaw himself. He testified for an entire day, walking the jury through his investigation step by step. The lies Ashworth had told, the fabricated story about trolley delays, the suspicious precision of his knowledge about Cordelia's clothing, the pattern of complaints from his former neighbors in Kensington about children and noise. Fitzpatrick asked. Ashworth sat motionless during this testimony, taking notes, his face betraying nothing. The defense's case was slim. Levy did what he could. He called a psychiatrist who testified that Ashworth showed signs of psychological trauma from the war. He enlisted at age 15, lying about his age to join the army. Saw combat in the Argonne Forest in 1918 as a 16-year-old boy. Witnessed horrific violence at a formative age. This kind of early trauma can create lasting psychological distortions. Are you saying Mr. Ashworth is insane? Levy asked. No. I'm saying his perception of reality has been shaped by his wartime experiences. He sees the world through a lens of preservation versus corruption, order versus chaos. In his mind, killing Cordelia Pemberton was an act of protection. An act of love? In his distorted perception, yes. But the prosecution psychiatrist countered. Quote, _211__. The jury agreed. After the psychiatric testimony, Levy made one last attempt. Character witnesses. Ashworth's supervisor from Baldwin Locomotive testified. Best worker I've ever had. Never late. Well, except that one day. Never caused trouble. Perfect attendance. Excellent work ethic. Meticulous attention to detail. His fellow veterans from the American Legion. Solid man. Good patriot. Always the first to volunteer. Organized our war bond drives. Helped build air raid shelters. The kind of man you want in your foxhole. But Fitzpatrick's cross-examination was devastating. Quote, 214. Quote, 215. Quote, 216. Quote, 217. Quote, 218. Quote, 220. Quote, 221. Quote, 222. Quote, 223. Quote, 224. The jury deliberated for 4 hours on a sweltering July afternoon. They sent out for sandwiches, sent out for more water. The judge waited. The attorneys waited. The packed courtroom waited. At 6:15 in the evening, they returned. Vivian Pemberton collapsed in her seat, sobbing. Walter put his arm around her, his own face crumpling. Around the courtroom, people murmured, nodded, some applauded until the judge banged his gavel. Ashworth sat motionless, showed no reaction whatsoever, simply continued taking notes in his neat, small handwriting. Ashworth took the stand, spoke calmly, clearly, explained his reasoning. Quote, 229, quote, he said. Quote, 230, quote. Quote, 231, quote. The prosecutor asked. Ashworth replied. The prosecutor asked about the lies, the trolley delay that never happened, the stumble on the stairs that never occurred, the fabricated story about the man in the overcoat. Ashworth explained patiently, as if to a child. Quote, 233, quote, 234, quote, 235, quote, 236, quote, 237, Ashworth said. The courtroom fell silent. Even the prosecutor seemed at a loss for words. How do you argue with someone who genuinely believes he performed an act of mercy? Walter and Vivian Pemberton sat in the front row. Vivian wept quietly. Walter stared at Ashworth with hollow eyes. When asked if they wanted to make a statement, Walter stood. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 239, underscore, underscore, he said. His voice was flat, drained of emotion. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 240, underscore, underscore. He sat down. Vivian buried her face in her hands. The defense called character witnesses. Ashworth supervisor from the Baldwin Locomotive Works testified, model employee, never late, never caused trouble, excellent work ethic, meticulous attention to detail. His fellow veterans from the American Legion. Solid man, good patriot, helped organize war bond drives, always the first to volunteer for building air raid shelters. His neighbors from earlier years. Quiet, respectful, always willing to help with building maintenance, took his responsibilities as air raid warden very seriously. But none of it mattered, because Ashworth himself had admitted what he'd done, had explained his reasoning, had shown no remorse. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Verdict: guilty of first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. The judge asked Ashworth if he had anything to say before sentencing. Ashworth stood. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 241, underscore, underscore. The judge's face hardened. Mr. Ashworth, you murdered an innocent child. You robbed her of her life, her future, her possibilities. You destroyed her family. You betrayed the trust of your community. And you show no remorse whatsoever. You present yourself as a guardian of virtue, but you are nothing more than a murderer who has dressed up his crime in the clothing of philosophy. I find you to be a danger to society and particularly to children. I sentence you to life imprisonment at Eastern State Penitentiary with no possibility of parole. You will spend the rest of your natural life behind bars, and may God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none. In 1943, Pennsylvania courts rarely imposed the death penalty for crimes that did not involve multiple victims or extreme brutality, particularly when the defendant had no prior criminal record and was a decorated war veteran. The prosecution had sought the death penalty, but the judge opted for life imprisonment, partly influenced by Ashworth's military service and the ongoing war effort that made executing veterans politically complicated. Ashworth listened to the sentence without expression, nodded once, said, quote, 243. They took him away. Walter and Vivian sat in the courtroom. Vivian continued to cry. Walter sat motionless, staring at the empty defendant's chair. Grimshaw approached them. I'm sorry for your loss, he said. Justice has been served. What justice? Walter asked quietly. My daughter is dead, and this monster gets to keep living. For the rest of his life in a cell, Grimshaw said. He'll never see freedom again. He'll die in prison. Walter nodded slowly. That's something, I suppose, but it doesn't bring her back. No, Grimshaw agreed. Nothing will. Walter stood, helped Vivian to her feet. They walked slowly out of the courtroom, two broken people who would carry this weight for the rest of their lives. Grimshaw remained alone, looked at the empty bench where Ashworth had sat, thought about all the criminals he'd encountered in his 23 years on the force. Hundreds of them. Thieves, killers, con artists, rapists, gangsters. But this one would stay with him. A man who murdered out of love for order, out of desire to preserve purity, out of absolute conviction that he was right. The most dangerous ones are always those who truly believe in their own righteousness. Epilogue. Eastern State Penitentiary, Pennsylvania, October 1967. Cell Block 7, Cell 42. Eldridge Beaumont Ashworth lay on his bunk and stared at the ceiling. 65 years old, 24 years in prison, heart failing, breathing difficult. The prison doctor said he didn't have much time left. Ashworth wasn't afraid. He had lived correctly, worked honestly in the prison machine shop, never broke the rules, maintained perfect discipline, met every work quota, Received 3 commendations from the warden for exemplary behavior. Could have requested parole hearings over the years. Didn't. Knew they would never grant it. Child killers don't deserve mercy. And he didn't need mercy. He was serving a just sentence. The law is the law. Break it, pay the price. That's proper. That's the way society functions. Only one thing hadn't changed in 24 years. Ashworth still believed he had been right. Cordelia Pemberton remained forever 8 years old, pure, correct, ideal. Hadn't been spoiled by adolescence, hadn't become crude, drinking, smoking, hadn't married some mediocre man, hadn't borne children in poverty, hadn't aged into bitterness and disappointment. She remained ideal, frozen in perfection. Wasn't that a blessing? Wasn't that worth the price? Ashworth had done the mathematics many times over the years. One life, preserved in perfection, versus one life, degraded by time and circumstance. The equation was simple. The answer was obvious. He had been right. History would understand, eventually. When the corruption of the modern world became so obvious that even fools could see it, they would look back and recognize that men like him, custodians of innocence, had been trying to save something precious. Ashworth closed his eyes, his heart clenched, sharp pain radiating through his chest. Then, silence. In the morning, the guard found the body. Declared death. Wrote in the log, Ashworth E.B., born 1902, died of heart failure, 3:47 a.m. They buried him in the prison cemetery. No relatives attended. No one claimed the body. A wooden cross with a number marked the grave. No name. No epitaph. Just another dead prisoner. Philadelphia, October 1967. Detective Horace Wendell Grimshaw had died 3 years earlier, in 1964, from a stroke. He was 68. In his files, among hundreds of cases spanning a distinguished career, the Ashworth file sat separately in a locked drawer. Marked in red pencil, the most frightening. His daughter, Margaret, sorting through her father's papers after his death, read the materials. The interrogation transcripts, the evidence reports, the trial testimony, the psychiatric evaluation that declared Ashworth sane. She sat in silence for a long time, then said to her husband, __quote _255 __. She closed the folder, put it back in the locked drawer, never looked at it again. Philadelphia, February 1952. Walter and Vivian Pemberton divorced on a cold Tuesday morning in family court. 9 years, 3 months, and 22 days after their daughter's death. They had tried. God knows they had tried to hold their marriage together through the shared grief, through the empty space where Cordelia should have been. But grief is a poison that seeps into everything. Every conversation led back to her. Did you remember to buy milk? Would somehow transform into, Cordelia used to love milk. Remember how she'd get a mustache? Every silence was filled with her absence. No small voice asking questions, no footsteps running down the hall, no laughter. They looked at each other and saw only the void. Walter looked at Vivian and saw the woman who had let their daughter go out to play. Vivian looked at Walter and saw the man who hadn't been there to protect their child. Neither thought these things consciously. Neither would have admitted them aloud. But the thoughts were there nonetheless, corrosive and cruel. They stopped talking about anything meaningful, communicated in grunts and nods. Walter came home from work, ate dinner in silence, went to bed. Vivian cooked, cleaned, performed the motions of being a wife without any of the substance. They were two ghosts haunting the same apartment, occasionally bumping into each other in the hallway. The apartment itself was a shrine to their dead child. Cordelia's room remained exactly as it had been on April 10, 1943. The blue dress with white checks, or rather, an identical replacement since the original was evidence, hung in the closet. Her books sat on the shelf, her dolls arranged on the bed. Vivian dusted the room every week, kept it perfect, as if Cordelia might walk through the door at any moment. Walter couldn't stand it. Couldn't walk past that room without feeling his chest constrict, his breath catch. He started drinking. Just a beer or two after work at first. Then a six-pack. Then whiskey. By 1951, he was drinking every night, trying to drown the image of his daughter's face, the memory of identifying her body in that shed. Vivian grew thinner and thinner, more translucent, as if she were slowly fading from the world. She stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping, would wake up at 3 in the morning and sit in Cordelia's room, holding her daughter's favorite doll, rocking back and forth in the dark. The final breaking point came in January 1952. Walter came home drunk as usual, found Vivian sitting in Cordelia's room as usual, and something in him snapped. "She's dead," he said from the doorway, his words slurred. "She's been dead 9 years. Sitting in here won't bring her back." Vivian looked up at him with hollow eyes. "I know she's dead." "Then why are you in here?" "Because it's all I have left of her." "You have me." "Do I?" Vivian's voice was quiet. Quote 265. Quote 266. Quote 267. That question hung in the air between them, and Walter realized he had no answer. 2 weeks later, Vivian filed for divorce. Walter didn't contest it. What was the point? They divided their possessions with cold efficiency. Vivian took Cordelia's room, every item, every piece of furniture, every memory. Walter kept the rest. They sold the apartment on Walnut Street. Neither could bear to stay there anymore. Vivian moved to New York City, as far from Philadelphia as she could get while staying on the East Coast. Got a job at a garment factory in the Bronx, working a sewing machine 12 hours a day. The repetitive work was good. It kept her hands busy, her mind occupied. She lived alone in a tiny studio apartment, never dated, never remarried, never spoke of having had a child. It was too painful to explain, and strangers' sympathy was worthless anyway. She took up smoking heavily after the divorce, 2 packs of Chesterfields a day. The doctor warned her about her lungs. She ignored him. What did it matter? She'd been dying slowly since April 10, 1943. The cigarettes would just speed up the inevitable. She died in 1979 from lung cancer. Was alone in her apartment when it happened. The super found her 3 days later when the neighbors complained about the smell. She was buried in a cemetery in Brooklyn, far from Philadelphia, far from the memories, far from the daughter she'd never stopped mourning. Walter stayed in Philadelphia, kept working at Baldwin Locomotive Works until the plant began downsizing in the late 1950s, took early retirement in 1961 at age 60, lived alone in a different apartment, couldn't afford the one on Walnut Street after the divorce, moved to a smaller place in Kensington. He drank. Started with beer, progressed to whiskey. By the mid-1960s, he was going through a fifth of bourbon every 2 days. His hands shook. His liver failed. Neighbors would see him stumbling, muttering to himself about little girls and monsters. He died in 1983 from cirrhosis, was found in his apartment 3 days after death. The landlord had noticed the smell. He was buried at Mount Vernon Cemetery, in a plot next to a small grave that had been waiting for him for 40 years. Mount Vernon Cemetery, Philadelphia, 2025. Section 14, row 22. 2 headstones side by side. Left, quote 268. Right, quote 269. Between the graves, a narrow path, overgrown with grass. Nobody walks there. Every spring, in mid-April, someone brings white tulips, 12 stems. 1 for each year she didn't get to live past 8. Leaves them silently. Who this person is, nobody knows. Maybe a distant relative. Maybe someone who read about the case. Maybe one of Cordelia's former classmates, now in their 80s. The city lives on. Walnut Street still stands. Building 217 has been renovated, converted to upscale apartments. The courtyard where Cordelia played is now a parking lot. Apartment 11, where Ashworth lived, is now a one-bedroom renting for $2,400 a month. The current tenants know nothing of the history. Only the very old neighbors might remember if you ask. __quote _270 ___. But most don't believe it. Sounds too bizarre. And at Mount Vernon Cemetery, Section 14, Row 22, lies a girl whom someone wanted to preserve and murdered. Forever 8 years old. Forever perfect in death. Forever robbed of the messy, beautiful life she deserved. The white tulips rest against the headstone. A small bird lands, sings, flies away into the April sky. Life goes on. But for Cordelia Ruth Pemberton, it stopped on April 10th, 1943, in a shed in South Philadelphia, at the hands of a man who believed destroying her was the same as saving her. And somewhere in an unmarked grave in a prison cemetery, Eldridge Ashworth lies beneath the earth, his conviction unshaken even in death. Two graves, two very different stories about innocence and the terrible things people do when they believe they know what's best. The truth is simple, though Ashworth never understood it. You cannot preserve life by ending it. You cannot protect innocence by destroying it. And the most dangerous evil is the one that calls itself good.